The message arrived at 2:17 in the morning. Adrian Walker wasn't supposed to see it. One brief vibration lit up the darkness beside his sleeping wife. A single sentence appeared on the screen before disappearing again. I can't stop thinking about last night. For months, Adrian would later realize, his marriage had been ending in small invisible pieces. That message was simply the first piece he actually saw. Seattle carried a different kind of rain in October. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind that forced people indoors or shut down roads. It simply existed, steady, gray, patient. Like background noise, much like Adrian and Melissa Walker's marriage. On a Wednesday evening, Adrian parked his SUV in the driveway of their suburban home and sat for a moment before stepping out. The windshield reflected the soft glow from the kitchen window. Melissa was already home. That should have comforted him. Instead, lately, it simply felt routine. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, sat at the dining table, coloring a school project while music played quietly from a speaker in the kitchen. Melissa stood at the counter scrolling through her phone. For a brief second, Adrian noticed her smile. Not the polite smile she used with neighbors. Not the exhausted smile she gave him most evenings. A different one. A private one. Then she locked the screen. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He kissed her cheek. She kissed him back. Everything looked normal. That was the frightening part. Nothing ever collapses all at once. The signs appear long before the disaster. Most people simply don't know how to read them. At 38, Adrian believed he understood his wife better than anyone. They had met during graduate school in Chicago. They had survived student debt, career uncertainty, a difficult pregnancy, and 2 cross-country relocations. Their marriage had never been perfect, but it had always felt solid, predictable, safe. Looking back, Melissa sometimes wondered if safe had become the problem. Not because Adrian was a bad husband. He wasn't. He remembered birthdays. He attended school events. He worked hard. He remained loyal. The problem was far more difficult to explain. Over the years, life had become logistics. Schedules, responsibilities, mortgage payments, parent-teacher meetings, grocery lists. Every conversation seemed connected to a task. Somewhere beneath all of that, Melissa had begun feeling invisible. She hated herself for thinking it. Millions of people would envy her life. Yet every morning she woke with a strange emptiness she couldn't name. That emptiness followed her into the office. The technology company where she worked occupied 3 floors of a downtown Seattle tower overlooking Elliott Bay. The environment was young, ambitious, and constantly changing. Employees celebrated promotions on social media. Managers competed for influence. Everyone seemed determined to become something bigger. Melissa often felt older than her years there. Then Noah Bennett arrived. He joined the company during the spring. 36 years old, confident, sharp, naturally charismatic. The kind of man who remembered details from conversations and made people feel interesting. During his first week, he stopped by Melissa's office. "I heard you're basically the person who keeps this place running," she laughed. "No pressure. I'm serious." His smile was easy, natural. "Everyone I've talked to says if they need help, they should ask Melissa." It was a simple compliment. Nothing more. Yet she remembered it all afternoon. That disturbed her. A few days later, he complimented a presentation she had delivered during a management meeting. The following week, he brought her coffee before a morning conference call. Little things, tiny moments, completely harmless. At least that was how it began. Now, 6 months later, Melissa found herself checking whether Noah was online before she started her workday. She told herself it meant nothing. She repeated that explanation so often she almost believed it. Almost. That Thursday afternoon, Noah appeared at her office door carrying 2 coffees. "Meeting survived?" "Barely. You looked ready to throw something at the finance team." Melissa laughed harder than the joke deserved. Noah noticed. He always noticed. "Long week?" he asked. "Aren't they all?" For a moment, she considered ending the conversation there. Instead, she sighed. The sigh opened a door. Noah stepped through it. "Everything okay at home?" The question lingered. Melissa hesitated. Most coworkers would have accepted a simple answer. Noah waited. People often reveal secrets when someone waits long enough. "Just tired," she said finally. That kind of tired usually means more than tired. Something tightened inside her chest. validation, recognition, the feeling of being seen. Dangerous things often arrive disguised as comfort. Across the city, Adrian spent the same afternoon reviewing architectural plans with a client. His phone contained 3 unread messages from Melissa. One about Sophie. One about groceries. One about a leaking faucet. Normal message. Married messages. The kind exchanged thousands of times over years together. He smiled while reading them. He had no reason not to. That evening, Melissa stood in their bathroom brushing her teeth while scrolling through social media. A notification appeared. Noah. Her stomach reacted before her mind did. A small rush of anticipation. The message was innocent. Hope your day improved. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing romantic. Nothing that would concern anyone. Yet she stared at it longer than necessary. Then she typed back. It did. Thanks for asking. A minute later another response arrived. You deserve better days. Melissa read the sentence twice. 3 times. Then she locked her phone. In bed that night, Adrian fell asleep within minutes. Melissa remained awake. Beside her, her husband breathed steadily. Across town, Noah was probably doing the same in his own apartment. The thought should have ended there. Instead, she found herself wondering whether he was still awake, whether he was thinking about her, whether anyone had wondered about her lately the way Noah seemed to. She hated the question, yet she couldn't stop asking it. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Inside, a boundary neither of them could see had already begun to move, and neither Adrian nor Melissa understood how expensive that movement would eventually become. November arrived with shorter days and longer shadows. The rain still came almost every morning, turning downtown Seattle into a city of umbrellas, reflections, and people moving quickly between buildings. From the outside, Melissa Walker's life continued exactly as it always had. She woke beside her husband. She drove Sophie to school. She attended meetings. She came home. She made dinner. She smiled when necessary. Nothing appeared different. The danger was that the most significant changes were happening where nobody could see them, including Melissa herself. At first, the conversations with Noah Bennett existed entirely within office hours. Questions about projects, comments about meetings, harmless observations. Then the messages started arriving earlier. A quick greeting before work, a joke during lunch, a comment after hours about something that had happened during the day. The transition was so gradual neither of them acknowledged it. That was how boundaries often disappeared, not through a single decision, but through 1,000 tiny permissions. One Tuesday morning, Melissa arrived at work to find a small paper cup sitting on her desk. Her usual coffee order. No note. No explanation. She smiled before she could stop herself. Moments later Noah appeared at her doorway. Good morning, you remembered. You looked disappointed. She laughed. I was going to pretend I didn't appreciate it. Terrible acting. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Both looked away. Neither mentioned it. That evening, while Adrian loaded dishes into the dishwasher, Melissa stood in the living room responding to messages. Who are you texting? Adrian asked casually. The question shouldn't have mattered, yet her pulse quickened. Work stuff. The answer came too fast. Adrian nodded and returned to the kitchen. The conversation ended. Melissa stared at the screen. Noah had sent a photo of the Seattle skyline from his office window. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secret. Yet she had lied. The realization lingered long after she put her phone away. Later that night, she tried to explain it to herself. It wasn't really lying. Not exactly. The message was from work. Noah was a colleague. There was nothing romantic happening. Nothing physical. Nothing that threatened her marriage. The explanation sounded reasonable. That made it even more dangerous. Human beings rarely see themselves as villains. Most people construct stories that allow them to remain the hero of their own lives. Melissa was no exception. By Thanksgiving, Noah had become the first person she wanted to tell whenever something good happened. A difficult project completed successfully. A compliment from senior leadership. An unexpected achievement. Without consciously choosing it, she began sharing parts of herself with Noah before sharing them with Adrian. The shift seemed small. Its consequences were not. One afternoon, they sat together in a quiet corner of the company cafeteria. The lunch rush had ended. Most employees had already returned to work. Outside the windows, rain streaked down the glass. Noah stirred his coffee. Can I ask you something? Melissa looked up. Depends. When was the last time somebody told you that you're impressive? She laughed awkwardly. What kind of question is that? A serious one. She shrugged. I don't know. I'm serious. His expression remained calm. You handle more responsibility than half the managers here. Melissa looked away. Compliments from Noah felt different, not because they were extraordinary, because he seemed to notice things Adrian no longer mentioned, or perhaps things Adrian simply assumed she already knew. The distinction mattered less than the feeling itself. You should give yourself more credit, Noah said. The words followed her for the rest of the day. That evening, Adrian sat across from her at the dinner table discussing holiday plans. Melissa nodded when appropriate, asked questions, participated in the conversation, yet part of her attention remained elsewhere. A message notification illuminated her phone. She resisted checking it for nearly 3 minutes. Then she reached for it. Adrian noticed. Not because the action itself was unusual, because it happened repeatedly. Small interruptions, tiny disappearances. Moments where Melissa seemed physically present but emotionally distant. You expecting something important? He asked. She looked up. What? Your phone. Oh. She forced a smile. Just work. Again. The same answer. The same half-truth. The same growing discomfort afterward. That night, after Adrian fell asleep, Melissa opened her messages. Noah had written. You seemed distracted tonight. She stared at the screen. How do you know I was distracted? A response arrived almost immediately. Because I've started paying attention. Her chest tightened. The sentence wasn't explicitly flirtatious. Yet it felt personal, intimate, dangerously intimate. Melissa should have ended the conversation there. Instead, she continued. For nearly 2 hours, they discussed careers, family expectations, old regrets, dreams neither had accomplished. The conversation wandered into territory most married people reserved for spouses. Neither acknowledged that fact. When Melissa finally set her phone aside, the digital clock beside her bed read 1:43 in the morning. She knew she would be exhausted the next day. She knew Adrian would wonder why she looked tired. She knew she was hiding something. Yet somehow, the situation still felt innocent. Because innocence wasn't measured by behavior anymore. It was measured by intention, and Melissa continued, insisting her intentions were pure. December arrived. Holiday decorations appeared throughout the city. Office parties filled restaurant reservations. Families posted smiling photographs online. The world seemed determined to celebrate togetherness. Melissa increasingly lived a divided existence. One version of herself belonged to her family. The other belonged to private conversations nobody else could see. The second version felt lighter, more exciting, more alive. That frightened her. One Friday evening, the company hosted a holiday gathering at a waterfront hotel. Music played. Employees mingled. Wine flowed freely. Melissa wore a dark green dress Adrian had once said was his favorite. When she entered the ballroom, Noah immediately noticed her. The look lasted only a second. Yet, it was enough. Wow! He said later, when they found themselves alone near the balcony. Melissa laughed nervously. What? You clean up pretty well. That's your compliment? It's the safe version. She felt warmth rise into her cheeks. Safe version? Noah smiled. I know better than to say the other one. For a brief moment neither spoke. The silence carried meaning words did not. Then another group of coworkers approached. The moment disappeared. But not completely. Melissa replayed it all weekend. Monday morning, she found herself waiting for another message. And another. And another. The anticipation had become a habit. The habit was becoming a dependency. One evening shortly before Christmas, Adrian entered their bedroom unexpectedly. Melissa immediately turned her phone face down. The movement lasted less than a second, but Adrian saw it. A strange feeling settled inside him. Not suspicion, not yet, just discomfort. A tiny fracture in certainty. Everything okay? He asked. Of course. She smiled. Too quickly, too brightly. The moment passed, yet something remained behind. Later, lying awake in darkness, Adrian stared at the ceiling. He couldn't explain why he felt unsettled. There was no evidence, no proof, no clear reason, only intuition. Across the bed, Melissa scrolled through messages after assuming he had fallen asleep. One message from Noah made her smile despite herself. Another made her heart race. A third remained on the screen for nearly a minute. I wish we had more time together outside work. Melissa read it repeatedly. Then she typed, deleted, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she responded. That would probably be a bad idea. The reply arrived seconds later. Probably. Neither of them mentioned the fact that neither had said no, and somewhere inside the silence that followed, a line that once seemed obvious became harder to see. January arrived beneath low clouds and freezing rain. The holidays ended, decorations disappeared from storefront windows, and Seattle returned to its familiar rhythm of work, traffic, and gray skies. For Adrian Walker, the new year felt like an opportunity to reconnect with his family. For Melissa, it felt like the beginning of a secret she could no longer honestly describe as harmless. The shift happened gradually, so gradually that she barely noticed it. At some point, Noah Bennett stopped being a colleague she enjoyed talking to. He became the voice she looked for when her phone vibrated. The person whose opinion mattered first. The person she imagined during quiet moments she once reserved for herself. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it excited her. That frightened her even more. One morning, while standing in line at a coffee shop near her office, Melissa found herself smiling at a message Noah had sent before sunrise. Good luck today. You'll probably be the smartest person in every meeting. A ridiculous compliment. Exaggerated. Unnecessary. Yet she reread it 3 times before putting her phone away. Minutes later another message appeared. Actually, forget probably. She laughed quietly. The stranger standing beside her glanced over. Melissa immediately locked the screen. For the rest of the day, she felt lighter, more confident, more visible. The feeling lingered long after the conversation ended. At home that evening, Adrian complimented the dinner she had prepared. Melissa thanked him, but the words barely registered. Her mind instantly compared the interaction to conversations with Noah. The comparison wasn't fair. Adrian had spent 12 years loving her. Noah had spent less than a year admiring a carefully curated version of her. Yet fairness rarely survives emotional attachment. The human mind often transforms what is unfamiliar into something extraordinary. Melissa began viewing Noah through a lens polished by fantasy. Every quality seemed amplified. His humor felt sharper. His attention felt deeper. His understanding felt more genuine. At the same time, Adrian's ordinary imperfections became impossible to ignore. When he forgot to respond to a text message, she noticed. When he spent too much time discussing work, she noticed. When he seemed distracted after a long day, she noticed. She compared a real husband carrying years of responsibilities to an idealized man who existed mostly in conversations and imagination. No real person could win that competition, least of all Adrian. One Saturday afternoon, Adrian suggested taking Sophie to a science museum downtown. Melissa agreed. The 3 of them spent hours exploring exhibits and watching demonstrations. To anyone watching, they appeared happy, normal, connected. Yet throughout the day Melissa found herself checking her phone whenever Adrian wasn't looking. A message from Noah arrived shortly after lunch. Looks like you're having fun. Attached was a laughing emoji. Melissa had posted a family photo to social media earlier that morning. She stared at his message, then replied, trying to be a good mom. The response came quickly. You don't have to try very hard. A simple sentence. But it made her smile. Standing only a few feet away, Adrian noticed. Not the message. The smile. Lately there seemed to be many smiles he wasn't part of. That observation followed him for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Adrian sat beside Melissa on the couch. For nearly an hour they watched television together. Or rather, Adrian watched television. Melissa periodically glanced down at her phone, responded to messages, then locked the screen. Again, and again, and again. Eventually, Adrian muted the television. Melissa looked up. What happened? Nothing. He hesitated, then forced a smile. You just seem busy. I'm answering work messages. The explanation came automatically now, a rehearsed reflex. Neither mentioned how often she used it. Adrian nodded. The conversation ended. But a small disappointment remained. Later that night, lying awake beside his sleeping wife, Adrian struggled to identify what felt wrong. The distance wasn't dramatic. There were no major arguments. No obvious warning signs. Only subtle absences. Melissa seemed physically present while emotionally somewhere else. The problem was that Adrian trusted her completely. Trust often delays recognition. When betrayal begins, most people search for innocent explanations first. Adrian blamed work, stress, burnout, parenting, anything except the truth, because the truth wasn't yet imaginable. Across town, Noah sat alone in his apartment staring at a message thread that had become increasingly personal over the past several months. He knew exactly what was happening, perhaps not entirely, but more than Melissa did. He recognized emotional dependence because he felt it too. The difference was that Noah wasn't married. He didn't have a husband sleeping beside him. He didn't have a child watching his every decision. The consequences looked different from where he stood. One evening after work, he and Melissa remained in the office long after most employees had left. The building grew quiet. Cleaning crews moved through hallways. The city lights glittered beyond the windows. Their conversation drifted away from work as it usually did. "Can I ask you something?" Noah said. Melissa looked up from her laptop. "Depends. Are you happy?" The question settled heavily between them. Melissa immediately knew he wasn't talking about work. She should have redirected the conversation. She should have changed the subject. Instead, she stared out at the city. "I don't know." The honesty surprised her. Noah remained silent, waiting. That had become one of his most powerful habits. He knew how to make people continue talking. "I love my family," she finally said. "That's not what I asked." The words landed harder than she expected. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Melissa said, "I'm tired all the time." Noah nodded. "That's not the same thing as happiness." The statement followed her home, followed her into bed, followed her into the following week. Because once a question enters someone's mind, it rarely leaves unchanged. "Are you happy?" Melissa began examining her marriage through that lens. The results were dangerous. Every disappointment became evidence. Every misunderstanding became proof. Every ordinary frustration gained new significance. The process happened almost unconsciously. Psychologists might have called it selective perception. Melissa simply believed she was becoming honest with herself. One rainy Thursday evening, Adrian returned home carrying flowers. No special occasion. No celebration. He had passed a florist on the way home and thought of her. 12 years earlier, the gesture would have thrilled Melissa. Now her first reaction was guilt. The flowers sat on the kitchen counter while she prepared dinner. Adrian smiled. "I figured the house could use some color." Melissa forced the smile back. "They're beautiful." And they were. Yet instead of feeling loved, she felt conflicted. Because earlier that day Noah had spent 40 minutes listening to her discuss frustrations she hadn't shared with her husband. The comparison emerged automatically. "Noah understands me." The thought appeared before she could stop it. Immediately afterward came another. Have I even given Adrian the chance? That question was harder to answer. Over the following weeks, the emotional attachment deepened. Messages began before sunrise and continued until midnight. Entire portions of Melissa's emotional life existed exclusively between her and Noah. Private jokes, shared frustrations, personal confessions. Moments Adrian never saw. Moments he didn't even know existed. The intimacy wasn't physical. That was the justification Melissa returned to repeatedly. Nothing physical had happened. Therefore she remained faithful. The logic comforted her. Even as she deleted messages before entering the house. Even as she hid notifications. Even as she adjusted her phone settings. So previews no longer appeared on the lock screen. Small actions. Small deceptions. Accumulating quietly. One night in late January, Adrian woke unexpectedly around 3 in the morning. The bedroom was dark, silent. Beside him, Melissa wasn't asleep. The faint glow of her phone illuminated part of her face. She smiled softly at something on the screen. Not a broad smile. Not laughter. Something more intimate. More private. Adrian watched for several seconds. Then closed his eyes again. He told himself it was nothing. A friend. Work. Social media. Any number of explanations. Because accepting those explanations was easier than confronting the uneasy feeling growing inside him. Across the mattress, Melissa continued typing. A message appeared from Noah. "Sometimes I think you're the only person who really gets me." Melissa stared at the words. Her heart beat faster. She knew that sentence crossed the line. Not a physical line. Not yet. But something important had shifted. For a long moment she considered not responding. Then she typed. "I think I understand you too." The message sent. The screen went dark. And somewhere in the silence of that winter night, a bond that neither of them had intended to create became impossible to deny. Neither realized how close they were to a point from which there would be no easy return. February arrived colder than usual. Seattle's skies seemed permanently covered by clouds, and the city lights reflected off wet streets long before sunset. For Adrian, life continued according to familiar routines. For Melissa, every routine now required deception. The emotional connection between her and Noah had grown beyond anything she could honestly dismiss as friendship. They still discussed work, but work had become the excuse rather than the reason. Their conversations now wandered through every corner of their lives. Childhood memories, past relationships, private fears, disappointments they rarely shared with anyone else. There were mornings when Noah knew her mood before Adrian did. That fact alone should have alarmed her. Instead, it made her feel understood. One evening after work, Melissa sat in her car outside their house for nearly 15 minutes before going inside. Her phone rested in her lap. A conversation with Noah remained open on the screen. Do you ever feel like you're living the life everyone expects instead of the life you actually want? She had stared at the question for several minutes before responding. Sometimes. The reply came immediately. Me too. Simple words. Yet they created a dangerous sense of shared loneliness. A feeling that they were somehow different from everyone around them. A feeling that nobody else understood. Psychologists often describe emotional affairs as relationships built upon selective intimacy. Two people reveal their best selves while hiding their worst. They become mirrors reflecting only what the other person wants to see. Melissa and Noah had begun living inside that mirror. At home, reality felt complicated. With Noah, everything felt effortless. At least that was the illusion. One Friday afternoon, Noah sent a message. Lunch? Melissa looked at the screen. Her calendar was full. She had responsibilities. Meetings. Deadlines. Excuse. Yet 10 minutes later she found herself walking toward a small restaurant several blocks from the office. The lunch lasted nearly 2 hours. Neither mentioned work more than once. Instead, they talked about dreams they had abandoned, places they wanted to visit, the lives they imagined having if different choices had been made years earlier. When Melissa finally returned to the office, she felt guilty, but she also felt energized, alive. The contradiction followed her home. That evening, Adrian noticed her unusual mood. You seem happy. Melissa hesitated. Do I? Yeah. He smiled. Honestly, it's nice to see. A painful knot formed inside her chest. Because Adrian sounded genuinely pleased. Not suspicious. Not angry. Simply happy that she seemed happier. For a moment she wanted to tell him everything. Not about Noah. Not the details. Just the truth that something inside their marriage felt broken, that she felt invisible, that she felt lost. Instead, she said nothing. The moment passed. Another opportunity disappeared. Weeks continued slipping by. The messages became more personal, more frequent, more intimate. One night, Noah confessed that he had been looking forward to their conversations more than any other part of his day. Melissa should have created distance. Instead, she admitted feeling the same. The honesty felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Afterward, neither could pretend the relationship was merely professional. The line had already been crossed emotionally. They simply avoided naming it. Because naming something makes it real. And reality carries consequences. March arrived. Cherry blossoms began appearing throughout parts of the city. The days slowly grew longer. The secret grew larger with them. One evening, after a difficult meeting, Melissa remained at work later than usual. Most employees had already gone home. The office floor felt strangely quiet. She sat in a conference room staring at her laptop when Noah appeared in the doorway. You okay? She laughed bitterly. Not really. Without thinking, she began talking. About stress. About exhaustion. About her marriage. About the growing feeling that she no longer recognized herself. Noah listened. For nearly an hour. When she finally finished, tears stood in her eyes. Embarrassed, she looked away. Noah moved closer. Not enough to touch her. Just enough to erase some of the distance between them. You deserve to be happy, Melissa. The words landed with enormous force. Because they echoed thoughts she had secretly been telling herself for months. Thoughts that justified every conversation, every lie, every hidden message, every emotional boundary she had crossed. The moment lingered. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The air seemed suddenly different, charged, dangerous. Then someone walked past the conference room. The spell broke. Both stepped back. Both pretended nothing had happened. But something had. The next few weeks became an exhausting cycle of guilt and rationalization. Melissa repeatedly promised herself she would create distance. Then Noah would send a message. She would answer. Another promise broken. Another justification created. She told herself that nothing physical had happened. She told herself that she still loved Adrian. She told herself that she was simply confused. Each explanation protected her from confronting the truth. She was emotionally involved with another man. And she knew it. By April, secrecy had become second nature. She deleted messages automatically, muted notifications, invented harmless explanations for missing time. None of the lies seemed significant individually. Together, they formed an entirely separate life. One Thursday afternoon, Noah invited her to attend a professional networking event across town. Several employees would be there. It sounded harmless, professional, safe. Melissa agreed. The event ended around 9 o'clock. Most attendees left shortly afterward. A few remained behind at the hotel bar. Melissa and Noah were among them. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did. Hours passed. The city lights glittered beyond the windows. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Eventually they found themselves alone. Neither seemed eager to leave. For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Noah spoke quietly. "I think about you all the time." Melissa froze. There it was. The truth they had been circling for months. No jokes. No ambiguity. No professional disguise. Just honesty. Raw and impossible to misunderstand. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She should have stood up. She should have gone home. She should have ended everything right there. Instead, she whispered, "I know." Noah stared at her. And? Melissa felt every warning inside her mind screaming. Thoughts of Adrian. Thoughts of Sophie. Thoughts of the life she had built. Yet another voice spoke louder. The voice that had been growing for months. The voice addicted to validation, to attention, to being desired, to feeling extraordinary again. "I think about you too." The silence afterward changed everything. Noah reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. No dramatic declaration followed. No passionate scene. No cinematic moment. Just two people sitting across from each other, finally admitting what had already become true. The physical affair did not begin that night, but the final barrier protecting their relationship collapsed. Over the following days, Melissa wrestled with overwhelming guilt. She promised herself she would stop, then she imagined losing Noah. The thought hurt more than she expected. That realization frightened her most of all, because it exposed the depth of her attachment. A week later, another business-related event took them outside the city. Nothing improper on the schedule, nothing suspicious on paper. Yet by then, both understood what was happening. Months of emotional dependency, months of secret intimacy, months of rationalization. All roads had been leading toward the same destination. When they finally crossed the last boundary and became physically involved, the moment was not exciting in the way Melissa had imagined. It was quiet, complicated, filled with emotion rather than triumph. Immediately afterward came relief, then guilt, then fear, then relief again. A cycle she would come to know well. Driving home the next day, Melissa stared through the windshield as rain blurred the highway ahead. For months, she had convinced herself that certain lines would never be crossed. Now they had been. And nothing inside her life felt simple anymore. That evening Adrian greeted her at the door. Sophie ran into her arms. The house smelled like dinner. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet Melissa understood something terrifying. The person walking into that house was carrying a secret large enough to destroy it. And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether she still had the power to stop what was coming. May arrived with longer evenings and warmer air. The city seemed brighter. Melissa's life did not. What had once felt exciting now required constant maintenance. Every secret demanded another secret. Every lie required additional lies. The affair with Noah had intensified in ways neither of them could easily control. They exchanged messages throughout the day. They found excuses to meet. They created private moments hidden between meetings, business trips, and family obligations. The relationship that had once existed in imagination now existed in reality. And reality was far more complicated. At first, Melissa believed crossing the physical boundary would resolve the uncertainty she had felt for months. Instead, it amplified everything. The guilt became heavier. The attachment became stronger. The fear became constant. She found herself living two completely different lives. In one life, she was a wife and mother. In the other, she was someone Noah claimed understood him better than anyone else. Maintaining both versions of herself was exhausting. Yet, she continued, because ending the affair now would require confronting what she had done. And Melissa was not ready to face that truth. Not yet. One Tuesday evening, Adrian arrived home shortly after 6. Melissa was supposed to be there. Instead, the house was empty. Sophie sat with a neighbor who had agreed to watch her for an hour. When Melissa finally walked through the front door nearly 90 minutes later, she appeared flustered. Traffic was horrible, she explained immediately. Adrian nodded. Seattle traffic could be terrible. The explanation sounded reasonable. Yet something bothered him. Not the delay. The preparation. It felt as though Melissa had rehearsed the answer before he even asked the question. For a moment, the thought lingered. Then, he pushed it away. Everyone had stressful days. Everyone became defensive occasionally. There was no reason to assume the worst. At least that was what Adrian kept telling himself. The following weekend, Melissa claimed she needed several hours to prepare a presentation for work. She spent most of Saturday afternoon away from home. When she returned, Adrian noticed an unusual brightness in her mood. The presentation seemed to have gone remarkably well. Or perhaps something else had. He didn't know. The uncertainty frustrated him, because the details no longer aligned the way they once had. Small inconsistencies appeared everywhere. Nothing dramatic, nothing conclusive. Just enough to create discomfort. One evening, Melissa mentioned having lunch alone. Later that week, Adrian overheard part of a conversation suggesting she had been with coworkers. Another time she described a meeting occurring on a day she had previously claimed to be working remotely. The contradictions were minor, yet they accumulated. Like droplets slowly filling a glass. Individually meaningless. Together impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Melissa's anxiety continued growing. Noah increasingly wanted more of her time. More attention. More emotional commitment. The relationship that had once felt like an escape now carried expectations. One afternoon, they met in a small cafe several miles from the office. The location had become one of their regular meeting places. Far enough away to avoid coworkers. Far enough away to avoid questions. Noah stirred his coffee absently. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" Melissa immediately knew what he meant. She stared out the window. "I try not to." "You can't avoid it forever." A knot formed in her stomach, because she had been asking herself the same question. What happens next? The affair could not remain hidden indefinitely, neither could her growing emotional dependence. Yet imagining divorce felt impossible. Imagining losing Noah felt painful. She wanted both worlds. The fantasy itself was unsustainable. "Let's not talk about this," she said quietly. Noah leaned back, disappointed. Reaction for the first time, Melissa noticed frustration in him. That unsettled her, because until now, their relationship had existed largely within idealized circumstances. Real-world pressures were beginning to intrude, and reality has a way of exposing weaknesses fantasy cannot hide. Back at home, Adrian continued noticing changes. Melissa protected her phone more carefully than before. She carried it everywhere. Bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, even short trips across the house. The device seemed permanently attached to her. Once, while helping Sophie with homework, Melissa became visibly irritated when she couldn't immediately find her phone. The reaction surprised everyone, including her. "It's just a phone," Adrian said gently. Melissa forced a laugh. "I know." But her relief when she finally located it felt disproportionate. Adrian noticed. He noticed many things now. Not because he suspected an affair. Because he was trying to understand why his wife seemed different. One evening, he suggested a weekend getaway. Nothing elaborate. Just 2 nights at a resort on the Olympic Peninsula. A chance to reconnect, to escape routines, to spend time together. Several years earlier, Melissa would have agreed instantly. Instead, she hesitated. Only briefly. But long enough. "I don't know if I can get away from work right now." The answer disappointed him more than he expected. Work again. Everything seemed connected to work. Every absence. Every distraction. Every explanation. Adrian smiled anyway. No problem. But later that night, he sat alone in the living room after everyone had gone to bed. The television played quietly. His attention remained elsewhere. He tried to identify exactly when things had started feeling different. The answer refused to come. There had been no major event. No dramatic shift. Only gradual distance. Like watching a shoreline disappear through fog. Across the hallway, Melissa lay awake in bed texting Noah. Their conversation had become increasingly emotional. Increasingly possessive. Increasingly dangerous. What began as validation had evolved into dependence. Noah no longer occupied part of her emotional world. He occupied a significant portion of it. That realization should have forced a decision. Instead, it deepened the conflict. One afternoon in late May, Melissa made a mistake. A small one. The kind people make when they are exhausted from maintaining lies. She told Adrian she would be attending a management dinner after work. The story was convincing. Except Adrian later spoke with the husband of one of Melissa's coworkers. During casual conversation, he learned the dinner had been cancelled days earlier. The discovery wasn't dramatic. The coworker's husband had no idea the information mattered. Yet Adrian felt something cold settle inside him. For several minutes he sat staring at his phone after the conversation ended. There had to be an explanation. A misunderstanding. Some detail he was missing. Yet for the first time, a possibility entered his mind. Not fully. Not clearly. Just a shadow. A question. What if she isn't telling me everything? The thought disturbed him. Not because it answered anything. Because it connected to dozens of smaller observations he had been ignoring. The late nights. The phone. The distance. The inconsistencies. The unexplained absences. Suddenly, they no longer felt isolated. They felt connected. That evening, Melissa returned home expecting an ordinary night. Instead, she found Adrian unusually quiet. Not angry. Not confrontational. Simply thoughtful. Watching. Observing. The change made her nervous immediately. Because guilt often recognizes danger before evidence exists. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah. He smiled. A little too calmly. Why wouldn't it be? Melissa forced herself to relax. The conversation moved on. But the unease remained. Later, after Adrian had fallen asleep, she sat alone in the darkness staring at her phone. A message from Noah appeared. Miss you. Normally the words would have comforted her. Tonight they didn't. For the first time, she felt trapped between two realities that could no longer coexist forever. One life depended on deception. The other depended on choices she wasn't prepared to make. And somewhere across the hall, Adrian lay awake longer than she realized. Staring at the ceiling. Replaying conversations. Re-examining memories. Without knowing it, he had begun assembling pieces of a puzzle. The picture remained incomplete, but the pattern was finally starting to emerge. And once patterns become visible, they are almost impossible to ignore. June arrived with rare stretches of sunshine. Seattle seemed determined to celebrate summer. Families filled parks. Restaurants opened outdoor seating. The waterfront buzzed with tourists and commuters alike. From the outside, the Walker family still looked intact. Inside, the foundation was beginning to crack. Adrian could feel it. He simply didn't know where the fracture started. Ever since discovering the lie about the cancelled management dinner, something had changed inside him. Not suspicion exactly. Suspicion implied certainty. This was worse. Uncertainty. The persistent feeling that an important truth existed just beyond his reach. For weeks he had tried to dismiss it. Tried to trust his wife the way he always had. Tried to convince himself that stress and imagination were creating problems where none existed. Yet, the inconsistencies kept appearing. And once a person's attention shifts, details that once seemed invisible suddenly become impossible to miss. Melissa sensed the change too. She became even more careful, more deliberate, more defensive. Every interaction felt like a balancing act. Every day required concentration. The affair with Noah continued. But the excitement that once fueled it had been replaced by anxiety. She lived in constant fear of making a mistake. The irony was that fear often creates the very mistakes people are trying to avoid. The mistake happened on a Tuesday morning. A completely ordinary Tuesday. The kind people forget within hours. Adrian had taken the day off to attend one of Sophie's school events. Melissa left for work earlier than usual. In her rush, she forgot something she almost never forgot. Her phone. It remained charging on the kitchen counter. She realized it nearly 20 minutes later. By then she was already downtown. When she called the house phone, Adrian answered. I left my phone. I figured. Can you bring it later? I'll drop it off after Sophie's event. Thanks. Her voice sounded unusually tense. Adrian noticed, but said nothing. After hanging up, he looked at the device resting on the counter. For several seconds he simply stared at it. Then he walked away. The phone was none of his business. Trust meant respecting boundaries. Trust meant not searching for reasons to doubt someone. That was what decent husbands did. That was what Adrian had always believed. An hour later, while preparing to leave for the school event, the phone vibrated. The screen illuminated. A notification appeared. Only a fragment of the message was visible, but it was enough. Last night was worth every risk. Adrian froze. For a moment he genuinely thought he had misunderstood. The words didn't make sense. Not in relation to Melissa. Not in relation to their marriage. Not in relation to the life he believed they shared. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. The notification disappeared. Silence returned. Yet everything felt different. His pulse accelerated. A strange pressure formed in his chest. He picked up the phone. Then immediately put it down. Picked it up again. For several long seconds, he stared at the lock screen. The woman he loved had never given him a reason to doubt her before this year. Never. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of trust. 12 years of certainty. Now one sentence was threatening all of it. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the message referred to something else. Maybe. The excuses sounded weak even inside his own head. Because deep down, another part of him had already connected the dots. The late nights. The secrecy. The lies. The distance. The unexplained happiness. The phone. The cancelled dinner. The growing emotional absence. Suddenly none of those things existed separately anymore. They belonged to the same story. And Adrian was finally beginning to understand what that story might be. He delivered the phone later that afternoon. Melissa met him in the lobby of her office building. The moment she saw him holding the device, a flash of panic crossed her face. Brief. Almost invisible. But Adrian saw it. The expression vanished immediately. Too quickly. Thank you. She took the phone. Their fingers touched. For years that gesture had felt familiar. Now it felt strangely foreign. Adrian forced a smile. No problem. Melissa studied him carefully, trying to determine whether he knew something, trying to determine whether the nightmare had already begun. His expression revealed nothing. Yet, after he left, she immediately checked her notifications. When she found Noah's message history, her stomach dropped. Had Adrian seen anything? The uncertainty followed her through the rest of the day. That evening she behaved almost perfectly. Too perfectly. She laughed more, asked more questions, paid more attention. The effort itself felt suspicious. Adrian noticed every detail, not because he wanted to, because he could no longer stop observing. That night, after Melissa fell asleep, Adrian sat alone in the living room. The house remained silent. Moonlight filtered through the windows. For hours, he replayed the previous year in his mind, and something disturbing began happening. Memories changed, not the events themselves. Their meaning, trauma reframing had begun. Moments that once seemed insignificant suddenly appeared different. A business trip she had seemed unusually excited about. A message that made her smile during dinner. A conversation abruptly ended when he entered the room. The way she turned her phone over. The increasing emotional distance. The cancelled getaway. The hidden tension whenever work was mentioned. Each memory alone explained nothing. Together they formed a pattern. A devastating one. Adrian felt physically sick. Because he wasn't discovering new information. He was reinterpreting information he already possessed. And the new interpretation was infinitely more painful. Over the following days he started paying attention. Carefully, quietly. Not as a detective. As a husband desperately hoping to prove himself wrong. Unfortunately, reality kept moving in the opposite direction. Melissa's stories occasionally conflicted with observable facts. Her schedule changed unexpectedly. She became protective whenever Noah's name surfaced in conversations about work. The reaction was subtle, but consistent. One afternoon Adrian searched Melissa's social media activity, not because he wanted to invade her privacy, because he needed reassurance. Instead, he discovered something unsettling. Noah appeared everywhere. Likes, comments, interactions. References. Not excessive enough to alarm outsiders. Frequent enough to alarm a husband paying attention. That evening Adrian finally looked up Noah Bennett online. The action itself felt like a betrayal, as though he were violating his own principles. Yet once he started, he couldn't stop. Photographs, professional profiles, company events, mutual appearances, evidence of proximity, evidence of connection, evidence that Noah occupied a larger role in Melissa's life than she had ever admitted. The realization hurt more than Adrian expected, because jealousy wasn't the primary emotion. Grief was. The grief of understanding that part of his wife's life existed beyond his reach. The grief of realizing someone else had become important to her. Days later, another piece fell into place. While reviewing family finances, Adrian noticed several expenses connected to locations Melissa had never mentioned visiting: restaurants, parking garages, hotels connected to conferences she claimed ended earlier. Nothing definitive. Nothing that could stand alone. But combined with everything else, the pattern grew impossible to ignore. One Friday night, Adrian sat alone on the back patio after everyone had gone to bed. The summer air felt strangely cold. Inside the house, lights gradually disappeared one by one. He remained motionless, staring into darkness, trying to process the possibility that had become increasingly difficult to deny. His wife might be having an affair. Even thinking, the words felt surreal. Impossible. Melissa wasn't reckless. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't the type of person who destroyed families. At least that was who he believed she was. Now he wasn't certain, and uncertainty can be more painful than truth, because uncertainty leaves room for hope. Hope prolongs suffering. The following week, Adrian made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of necessity. He needed certainty. Whatever the truth was, he needed to see it clearly. The guessing was destroying him. The unanswered questions were consuming every quiet moment. For the first time since the nightmare began, Adrian stopped looking for innocent explanations. Instead, he prepared himself for the possibility that the person he trusted most had been living a life he never imagined. And somewhere across the city, Melissa continued convincing herself she could still manage the situation, still control the outcome, still prevent everything from collapsing. She didn't realize the collapse had already begun, because the most dangerous stage of betrayal is not discovery. It's the moment just before discovery, the moment when one person finally sees enough pieces to recognize the picture. And Adrian Walker was closer to that moment than Melissa could possibly understand. July arrived beneath clear skies and uncomfortable heat. For most people, summer felt like freedom. For Adrian Walker, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. For weeks he had lived between suspicion and certainty. Now that space was disappearing. The pieces no longer formed a possibility. They formed a conclusion. Yet even then, part of him hoped he was wrong. Not because the evidence was weak. Because the alternative would destroy everything he believed about his marriage. The final confirmation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Melissa had told him she would be attending an all-day leadership workshop in Bellevue. The explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. The problem was that the workshop had ended hours earlier. Adrian discovered this accidentally while reviewing information posted publicly by the company. At first he stared at the screen, then at the clock, then back at the screen again. A strange calm settled over him. Not relief, not anger. The emotional equivalent of a bone finally breaking after weeks of pressure. Something inside him simply stopped resisting reality. For months he had searched for innocent explanations. There were none left. That evening he drove through downtown Seattle with no clear destination. The city moved around him in a blur of lights and traffic. His hands remained steady on the steering wheel. His thoughts did not. Eventually he found himself parked several blocks away from a hotel whose name appeared among the financial records he had quietly examined during recent weeks. He told himself he was only looking, only gathering certainty, nothing more. A little after 6 o'clock, he saw Melissa. She wasn't alone. Noah Bennett walked beside her. They were laughing about something, relaxed, comfortable, intimate. Not like coworkers. Not like friends. Not like two people protecting professional boundaries. The sight hit Adrian with unexpected force. Not because of what they were doing. Because of how natural it looked. How familiar. As if an entire relationship had developed without his knowledge. For several seconds he couldn't breathe. Years of trust collapsed in complete silence. No dramatic confrontation occurred in that parking lot. No shouting. No accusations. Adrian simply watched. And finally understood. The worst part wasn't seeing them together. The worst part was realizing how long they had likely been together. How many conversations. How many lies. How many moments stolen from a life he thought was real. He drove home before Melissa returned. When she entered the house later that evening, she found Adrian helping Sophie with a summer reading assignment. Everything looked normal. The normality terrified her, because she immediately sensed something was different. Adrian smiled, asked about her day, listened politely. Nothing more. Yet his eyes seemed distant, as though part of him had already left. That night he barely slept, not because he needed more evidence, because certainty carried its own kind of pain. Trauma, reframing intensified. Memories rearranged themselves relentlessly. Every late night, every cancelled plan, every hidden message, every unexplained smile. Years of shared history now felt contaminated by doubt. The process was brutal, like watching an old photograph slowly burn while being unable to look away. Across the bed, Melissa remained awake too. The guilt she had been suppressing for months felt heavier than ever. She sensed danger. Not evidence. Not exposure. Something worse. Distance. The kind of emotional withdrawal that often comes before irreversible decisions. Meanwhile, Noah was dealing with problems of his own. The fantasy he and Melissa had created was beginning to collide with reality. For months they had spoken about possibilities, about futures, about happiness, about what life could look like if circumstances were different. Now those conversations demanded actual choices. And choices required sacrifice. The difference became painfully obvious during a lunch meeting the following week. Melissa sat across from Noah at their usual cafe. The atmosphere felt different, more serious, less romantic. Noah seemed distracted. She noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." The answer arrived too quickly. Melissa frowned. "You've been distant." Noah seethed. For several seconds he stared into his coffee. Then he finally spoke. "My promotion review is next month." Melissa blinked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "A lot." The answer unsettled her. For the first time, she heard calculation in his voice. Professional concern. Risk assessment. Reality. Months earlier, Noah had spoken about feelings. Now he spoke about consequences. The distinction frightened her. "You're worried about work?" "I'm worried about everything." Melissa stared at him. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Then she asked the question she had secretly avoided for months. "If I left my marriage?" Noah looked up. "What?" "If I actually did it?" The words hung in the air. Heavy. Irreversible. What would happen? For the first time since their relationship began, Noah didn't answer immediately. That hesitation changed everything. Because fantasy responds instantly. Reality requires thought. Melissa felt something cold move through her chest. "What would happen?" she repeated. Noah looked away. Toward the window. Toward the street. Toward anywhere except her. Finally he spoke. "I don't know." 3 simple words. Yet they shattered months of assumptions. Melissa suddenly realized how many promises had never actually been promises. How many future possibilities had been implied rather than stated. How much she had projected onto conversations that now felt painfully vague. The realization continued unfolding over the following days. Noah became increasingly cautious, increasingly concerned about professional consequences, increasingly reluctant whenever discussions turned toward actual commitment. The contrast was impossible to ignore. When secrecy had been exciting, he had been fearless. Now that real sacrifice might be required, hesitation appeared everywhere. Melissa hated herself for noticing it, because deep down she already knew what it meant. The relationship she had risked everything for might not survive exposure. The relationship she had used to justify her choices might not be as solid as she believed. The illusion was cracking, and beneath the illusion stood an ordinary man, flawed, fearful, self-interested, human, just like everyone else, including her. The confrontation happened on a rainy Sunday evening. Appropriately enough, the weather had returned to Seattle's familiar gray. Sophie was spending the night at a friend's house. For the first time in weeks, Adrian and Melissa were alone. The house felt unusually quiet. Adrian sat at the dining table. A folder rested beside him. Melissa noticed it immediately. Something inside her stomach tightened. What's that? Adrian looked up. For a moment, she barely recognized his expression. Not angry. Not emotional. Exhausted. Profoundly exhausted. Sit down. The words landed like a verdict. Melissa obeyed. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Adrian opened the folder. Credit card statements. Dates. Locations. Printed records. Carefully organized. Methodically arranged. Months of evidence. Melissa's face drained of color. The room seemed to shrink around her. Adrian watched silently. Not because he enjoyed her discomfort. Because he no longer possessed the energy required for anger. Finally, Melissa whispered, Adrienne. He raised a hand. The gesture stopped her instantly. How long? The question sounded almost gentle. That made it worse. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't answer. Because every possible answer was catastrophic. How long? He repeated. His voice cracked slightly. For the first time, she heard the pain beneath the calm. The sound broke something inside her. Several months. The words barely emerged. Adrian lowered his head, closed his eyes, and nodded, as if confirming a fact he already knew. The silence afterward felt endless. Then came the question she feared most. Did you love him? Melissa froze. Tears slid down her face. Because the truth was complicated, and complexity offers no comfort during betrayal. I thought I did. Thought. Past tense. The word caught Adrian's attention immediately. He looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time that evening. And suddenly he understood something. Melissa was crying not only because she had been caught. She was mourning something too. Not the marriage. The fantasy. The illusion. The future she had imagined. A future that now seemed impossible. Thought? Adrian asked quietly. Melissa broke completely. Months of rationalization collapsed. Months of denial. Months of self-deception. He doesn't want the life he talked about. The confession emerged between sobs. Adrian listened, numb, as Melissa described Noah's hesitation, his growing distance, his concern for his career, his refusal to make clear commitments. Every revelation felt surreal. The man who had helped destroy their marriage wasn't even willing to risk his own comfort. The irony was almost unbearable. Eventually the tears stopped. The truth remained. So did the damage. Adrian stood and walked toward the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. For a long time he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded calm, almost peaceful. That frightened Melissa more than rage ever could. Because she realized something important. Her husband wasn't deciding whether to forgive her. He was deciding how to leave. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that the decision had probably already been made. The divorce process began 3 weeks later. Not with shouting. Not with revenge. Not with public humiliation. Just paperwork. Signatures. Deadlines. Appointments. The quiet administrative dismantling of a life that had taken more than a decade to build. Melissa had imagined many possible outcomes during the months of her affair. She had imagined being discovered. She had imagined dramatic arguments. She had imagined somehow repairing the damage afterward. What she never imagined was Adrian's silence. That silence became the most painful consequence of all, because it meant something fundamental had died. Not his love for her. Not immediately. Something even more important. His belief in her. Trust. Once destroyed, it refused to return. The man who sat across from her during mediation looked familiar, yet somehow different. Stronger. Clearer. As though the months of uncertainty had exhausted him, but certainty itself had finally set him free. The realization devastated her, because she had spent so long believing Adrian needed her. Now she was watching him learn that he didn't. The first major collapse occurred at work. Corporate rumors moved faster than facts. The affair had remained secret for months. Exposure changed everything. Noah's promotion review was suspended pending an internal investigation into workplace conduct. Senior leadership became involved. Human resources became involved. Legal teams became involved. The atmosphere shifted overnight. People who once laughed with Noah now avoided being associated with him. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Doors closed. Invitations disappeared. The attention he once enjoyed transformed into scrutiny. Melissa experienced the same treatment. Not official condemnation. Something colder. Distance. Professional trust evaporated. Coworkers became careful around her. Conversations shortened. Relationships changed. Every interaction reminded her that reputations require years to build and only moments to damage. The consequences extended beyond the office. Friends gradually learned what happened. Not every detail. Enough. The social circles she and Adrian had shared for years quietly fractured. Some people remained supportive. Others disappeared completely. Many chose neutrality. The result felt the same: isolation. The hardest conversations involved Sophie. No courtroom proceeding. No professional consequence. No public embarrassment hurt as much as those conversations. One afternoon, several months after the separation, Melissa sat beside her daughter on a park bench overlooking Lake Washington. The autumn air carried the first hints of cold weather. Leaves drifted across the walking paths. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Sophie asked the question. A simple question. The kind only children can ask. Why doesn't Dad live with us anymore? Melissa felt her throat tighten. She had rehearsed answers, prepared explanations. None felt adequate. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Sophie nodded slowly. The child remained silent for a moment, then asked another question. Were you the mistake? The words hit harder than any accusation ever could. Melissa physically flinched. Children often possess a brutal honesty adults lose with age. There was no manipulation, no judgment, only confusion and truth. For several seconds Melissa couldn't speak, because for the first time, she was forced to confront her choices from her daughter's perspective, not from her own, not from Noah's, not from Adrian's. A child who simply wanted her family back, a child who would live with consequences she never chose. That night Melissa cried harder than she had on the day Adrian confronted her, because guilt feels different when viewed through the eyes of someone innocent. Meanwhile, Noah's role in her life continued shrinking. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. The relationship that once consumed her thoughts now felt strangely fragile. Without secrecy, without fantasy, without stolen moments and emotional intensity, very little remained. Reality exposed weaknesses that excitement had concealed. Eventually they met one final time. Arcade Restaurant. A nearly empty dining room, rain falling beyond the windows. Appropriately, Seattle looked exactly as it had when everything began. Noah arrived late. Melissa immediately noticed how uncomfortable he seemed, how eager he appeared to finish the conversation before it started. The realization hurt. Not because she still loved him, because she finally understood him, really understood him. The version she had fallen for never existed. That version had been built from validation, projection, loneliness, and fantasy. The real Noah was simply a flawed man who enjoyed being admired, just as she had been a flawed woman who enjoyed feeling desired. Neither had been honest enough to admit it. When the conversation ended, neither suggested meeting again, neither promised anything, neither discussed the future. There wasn't one. They left separately, and that chapter of her life ended not with passion, but disappointment. Months passed. Then a year. Life continued, as life always does. Adrian moved into a townhouse overlooking Puget Sound. Smaller than the family home, quieter, simpler. For the first time in years, he began rebuilding a life entirely on his own terms. The healing wasn't immediate. Betrayal leaves scars. Certain memories still triggered pain. Certain dates remained difficult. Certain songs reminded him of the life he lost. Yet gradually something changed. The grief stopped controlling him. Trauma reframing continued, but in a healthier direction. The memories no longer existed solely as evidence of betrayal. They became lessons, proof of survival, proof that losing someone else's version of love did not require losing himself. He spent more time with Sophie, returned to hobbies abandoned years earlier, reconnected with friends, accepted opportunities he once ignored. Most importantly, he stopped measuring his worth through someone else's choices. That became his true victory. Not revenge, not superiority, freedom. On a cold November evening, nearly 2 years after the affair was exposed, Adrian attended Sophie's school concert. Parents filled the auditorium. Children adjusted instruments nervously. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Melissa sat several rows away. The distance between them felt symbolic, not hostile, permanent. During intermission, their eyes met briefly. For a moment neither looked away. Melissa saw something she never expected. Peace. The pain she had caused remained part of Adrian's history, but it no longer defined him. He had moved beyond it. The realization brought both relief and sorrow, because she finally understood what she had lost. Not merely a marriage, not merely a house, not merely a family structure. She had lost a man who had genuinely loved her when she was least deserving of it. A man who had offered loyalty she failed to appreciate until it was gone. That night, after returning to her apartment, Melissa sat alone by the window. Rain streaked across the glass. Seattle's skyline glowed in the distance. The city looked unchanged. She did not. For years she had blamed circumstances. Distance, routine, marriage, stress, unhappiness. Now she understood something uncomfortable. The affair had not happened because Adrian was inadequate. It happened because she kept choosing temporary validation over difficult honesty. She had mistaken attention for intimacy, excitement for connection, fantasy for love, and by the time she recognized the difference, the cost had already been paid. Her family was gone. Her marriage was gone. The future she once imagined was gone. No apology could reverse it. No regret could repair it. No amount of understanding could undo the damage. That was the final consequence. Not punishment. Reality. Across the city, Adrian stood on the deck of his townhouse overlooking dark water and distant lights. The wind carried the scent of rain. Inside, Sophie was asleep after the concert. For several minutes, he watched the waves moving through the darkness. Then he smiled. Not because the past no longer mattered. Because it no longer controlled him. The betrayal had taken many things. His trust, his marriage, his certainty. But it had failed to take the most important thing, his sense of self. And in the end, that was the one thing Melissa never truly understood until she lost him.